Hello.
Hi.
My name's Mariam.
I'm Nakul. Yeah.
And my name is Aniruddha.
Thanks both for joining. It's really a pleasure to be able to speak with both of you, and there's a couple of things that I wanted to chat with you both about. Lee Etherington from Tusk Festival thought it would be interesting for the three of us to get together and have a conversation. I think there are areas in our practice that overlap and then sort of differing perspectives about how we all work and how we feel about things and experiences. And I thought it would be nice to have a conversation together and see where it goes. So I kind of wanted to start and ask Aniruddha about a project that you've started and you're involved in. Can you tell us a little bit about it, please?
Yeah, I didn't actually start it. It was initiated by Dr. Amit Dinesh Patel, who is a lecturer and academic and artist in relation to experimental music and sound art. And he is now, well, the project's based at University of Greenwich in London, and its remit is to investigate the relative lack of involvement of musicians of color or Black people in the areas of sound art and experimental music within the UK. So I'm one of the commissioned participants, one of 6 or 7, including Amit himself. And basically we're all being interviewed about our experiences, our prior experiences, and our practice and experience, current practice in the area of experimental music in its broadest sense.
So how has it been going, and is there any findings at the moment that you can share with us, and how it's going and progressing? Because I have ideas immediately and presumptions, and I want them to be wrong. Yeah.
It's kind of early days. I mean, the nature of the project is actually to, aside from each of the 7 participants being commissioned to write and complete 2 10-minute pieces of music, which will ultimately come out on a piece of vinyl. So the whole project's going to be presented as an LP as well as other places. So we are all being interviewed on a kind of regular basis, at least once a month, and that started about 6 months ago, with a view to finding out our previous lives, if we had one, musically, as I do, which was outside the area of what roughly call experimental music. I was doing more electronic music with Asian Dub Foundation and other people over a period of 30 years. And it's only in the last 5 years that I've returned to my pre-ADF roots in kind of more abstract experimental sounds, noise, this kind of stuff. And so we're being interviewed about those the entirety of all of those experiences. And that includes, I suppose, other people's reactions to what we do, what difficulties we may have encountered or attitudes, etc. So at the moment, I've not met all the other participants, only a couple of others. And so I don't know what the collective findings are as yet. And all of these are going to go towards various pieces of writing, but one of them is going to be an actual book. And each of the participants, we are being invited to contribute a chapter. So that's going to be my first kind of experience of officially having to use some kind of academic language or writing. And, you know, I'll be assisted in this endeavor. So there's gonna be a book, and I think actually the project is going to present material towards a white paper, which is going to be presented to Parliament in relation to this issue. Because if you think about it, experimental music and sound art in the UK, it's one of the last bastions of whiteness within music. You know, even classical music, you can say, well, there's a quite a presence for quite a while, albeit still underrepresented. You know, an underrepresentation of Black people, people of color, but nevertheless, it's not unusual to see people in that area. Whereas in relation to experimental music, you know, you seldom see or read about Black people in this country, in the UK.
I mean, it's fascinating to hear, because everything that you say just feels true.
Yeah.
And there's a truth in your honesty and in the way you talk about it, and your experience is very different to mine. I wonder if there's anything Nakul can relate to there.
In fact, I was just thinking, I moved to the UK only recently, as in, it's been 3-4 years, but it doesn't really count because of COVID, right? So the limited exposure that I've had to the experimental, the so-called experimental field here, I have always felt welcome, but I have always also experienced a sense of a lack of understanding, or sometimes can be can be thought of as a mishearing, which may be intentional or not. And for me, I don't know, because this is probably because I come from a totally different cultural tradition. I was trained in South Indian classical music. So when the kind of music that I make here, I have sometimes encountered a kind of like a contemporary version of Orientalist thought, where in terms of how my music is seen and how it is listened to, the mode of engagement with it. But as a community, the community of experimental music in the UK, I'm totally I've not spent much time to actually understand or even know about the whiteness of the scene, and so yeah, it is something that I'm still learning. But I can see that at least I can see some kind of effects of it, for the lack of understanding for a field which claims itself to be so-called experimental and broad-minded than anything else.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear, because locating the whiteness feels like it's easier to locate the non-whiteness in many respects. So I don't know if there's anything here anyone can relate to, but I often walk in the room and I am the woman. I have mixed heritage, I'm northern, I'm working class, I'm queer, and I'm the experimental one. So I tick several boxes just by walking in a room. So that's how I locate the whiteness, by not being it necessarily. Yeah, also, this is an interesting conversation for me because I'm 37 and I've been doing this for, I've been working in this scene for quite a while. And I think this is the first time I've had a conversation with this group where I'm the whitest person here because of my mixed heritage. And I'm not here because I'm a woman. I'm invited to this conversation as an artist and nothing else. I'm able to talk about this, but it's not as a woman and an artist in the experimental scene. So for me, it's really, it feels like quite a privilege to be able to be in a room where I'm speaking with two men as well, because, you know, I get isolated for many reasons that we're talking about here. But it kind of, I was quite taken aback when Lee was like, oh, you should just, would you be up for this conversation? And like, to Lee, it just seemed quite normal to just go, you know, because I speak with Lee about these issues that were, you know, some of which we're bringing up now on the regular. And he's like, I feel like you need to have a platform and you need to vent, you know? Yeah. I was interested that you spoke about a lack of understanding. And what is it that both of you think is a lack of understanding in the UK's experimental scene? What needs addressing? And I suppose my question after that is, how do we address it?
That's there's two questions there. That the how is a little bit, I think that's after, and it's a little more difficult. So we need to identify what needs addressing. Actually, for me personally, there are more issues than simply me being of a different culture or ethnicity, because I mean, culturally I'm British, or a different color. I mean, you touched upon it yourself. I think the issues of class have not been addressed. The issues of who can afford certain equipment. You know, people are often economically very economically challenged, and therefore that's one thing that straight away might exclude them from certain areas of experimental music. So for me, it's way more than, you know, the issues of there are no Black or Asian musicians in or relatively few in experimental sound in this country. I think there's a much wider issue of a perceived and also real elitism that exists within experimental music and the places that it's either hosted or performed at. And my real wish is to see as many people as possible, you know, regardless of their color, their class or any other issue, engaging in this music, both as practitioners and as listeners. And I think that almost needs to be addressed first, you know. So it's not just the fact that still after 30 years, after going like in the 80s to London's Musician Collective and, you know, maybe only ever seeing one person of color or one Black person. And still to this day, when I went to, when I've been to experimental events recently, which is something I'm starting to do as part of my research, and you still don't see much of a change there. So I think there's serious issues just with the whole notion of experimental music and how it's defined, who has access to it for various reasons, whether it's economic, whether they are excluded for, I don't know, because they have not had access to that particular education. You know, where is experimental music taught? Is it more likely to be taught in certain communities than others? You know, so there's so many issues like that. Whereas what I often say to people is that we are actually surrounded by all the components that you need to that you would use in experimental music. You know, we literally do not live in a vacuum. We are surrounded by field recordings, you know, ongoing field recordings, the traffic, the sound we hear from in the background from the TV or the radio. These are all components that we use in experimental sound. We watch films, we watch plays, we listen to adverts, video games. All of these utilize experimental sound. The problem comes when those other things are taken away and we are left with just the pure sound, and then suddenly it's intellectual or it's inaccessible. All right, and personally I want to break down those misconceptions or those prejudices, or I want to break down the attitudes of practitioners or venues who have a certain attitude whereby they don't encourage people to enter those places. Because I love these sounds, and my personal thing is I engage in this music and these sounds and these sometimes abstract noises and sounds because I love it, and I just want to convey that love of that music to other people and show them you can use all of these sounds and you can use these tools as well, and you can incorporate it in your own music, as well as just in engaging with those sounds in their purity as well. So, you know, I think there's a general issue to be dealt with the whole area of experimental sound and sound art.
Nakul, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, that was very interesting to listen to, Aniruddha. It was obviously I do not know much about the field here in the UK, the scene here in the UK, but one thing that what you just said reminded me of was I was recently collaborating with an artist from India, and I was for the Counterflows Festival, and I had approached another artist initially, and he is a dancer of this traditional dance form called Mohiniyattam, and which interestingly is a female dominated art form, and men do not find a place to perform it. And he also comes from a marginalized community. And one of the things that when I pitched this idea to him of taking an so-called experimental interpretation of the art form, something he told me really kind of stuck with me. He said, I do not get enough opportunities to perform my art form the way I want to, or the way I learned it. Why would I be interested in an experimental approach? And it was a very interesting moment for me, because I realized the privilege of being an experimental musician in a way, and it is a privileged position itself. When it is for me, I never thought about it, because I already had access to the spaces for the kind of which presented the kind of music that I learned, and I already had access to it. I could easily go in and I could do that. So it allowed me to kind of go beyond it, or even gave me the opportunity to go beyond it and think about other issues, or how do I start thinking about it from a different perspective. But here there are people who are not even able to perform the art form the way they initially learned it. So that kind of highlighted the whole privileged position of experimental, so-called experimental, as an artistic mode of thought. And second thing that I think really that I was thinking about is I have always found it difficult to accept the term experimental, and at the same time to even understand what kind of falls within it. And it is and this is a question that has always bothered me as an artist. How do I place myself? And for me, these labels kind of sometimes as genres, kind of make me really uncomfortable, because it is still steeped in a very specific mode of thought that originated in the West, and in a specific way of thinking about music, or thinking about certain issues in the society, and in terms of the political thrust of it, right? So for me, this question of experimental, what counts as experimental, there is this whole tradition of like, you know, the university, where, you know, the whole experimental thought that comes from the academia, or like, you know, within that side, and then there is this whole underground scene which kind of totally goes against it, kind of against the elitism of academia itself. And both these labels, I have sometimes kind of like I have seen them intersecting with each other, and kind of like, you know, pulling back and being opposed to each other. And what I think, at least, this is a very personal opinion probably, is that even though there is this whole dichotomous relationship between this idea of so-called experimental and / underground, there is something, there is an underlying thought that kind of connects them in terms of how their politics are expressed, in kind of like, you know, fighting the a certain notion of sound, or fighting or kind of like, you know, fighting against the hegemonic Western classical, traditional forms of Western classical, let's say, or you know, a specific, you know, university educated kind of music versus something that you always sit at home and make on your laptop, even when you have never gone to a music school. There's a specific way of engaging with this politics that kind of connects them both. And a person like me, and now I'm speaking about me, and I was not brought up in the UK. For me, when I enter that scene, what happens for me, or what I see, is at least this kind of an assumption that I belong to the same mode of thought, or this same way of this. We all belong. We are all fighting the same fight. Yes, but we are using different tools. So there is a certain kind of like assumption that, okay, because you are in the same fight with us, you are fighting the same way as us. So that is the way I'm going to interpret you, or that is the way I'm going to, you know, kind of listen to you. That's the places where I'm going to put you, and that's the questions that I'm going to ask you, and that's where I want you to speak. So, yeah, the fight is the same, but that doesn't mean that there are different ways of fighting, and for people coming from different places, there are different ways of engaging with it, and that, I think, is where this lack of kind of understanding of diversity comes in this field. Diversity in terms of like, you know, even ethnicity or culture on a superficial level probably exists, but to a much lesser extent that we would like. But even further, if we go, there is a lack of understanding of the diversity of ways in which people engage with this fight. And I think if we are able to rethink that, to as a community, if we can take a step back and give the others a space to explain their tools of you know, coming to this fight, their weapons, or whatever their political thrusts are, and try to kind of like, you know, reconfigure the way in which we see this fight happening, right, or this kind of struggle happening, irrespective of whether we are both on the same side or whatever it is. A recalibration of the way we see our the fellow you know, musicians in this field is really important to kind of really you know, tackle this problem, is what I think from my limited understanding of the field here, I guess.
I mean, it seems completely natural to me that there has to be a diverse way of, as you're saying, fight the good fight, because experimental, in my understanding, means it needs to be diverse. Like, how could you possibly know what's going to be experimental? But it's so interesting to hear your understanding and your experiences come up and immediately say, yeah, actually it's not, it's one. I think I'm so used to fighting that I'm so used to the one, I'm used to the fight being the only way. So it's a further step back than what you're even talking about. I think I'm realizing this as you're saying that, and I'm thinking about it. I'm going, it's always a fight within the fight. So like, but I've accepted this truth. It's been quite a long time I've been doing this. But yeah, it's kind of like, in principle, the idea that something is experimental should mean that it is continually open to adjustment, to change, to revolution, to evolving into something else. And yeah, someone else standing there lighting the match and going, it's this now, you know, yeah, fascinating to hear all of this. Really fascinating. And Anarudo, what you were talking about, classism, elitism, this lack of access, and that access, that how it manifests in so many different ways, whether it's a school of thought, whether it's lack of education, or actually too much. This is a concept, too much education, which holds you back. You're so far schooled up the arse, basically, that you can't not think in that way. I do think that, having been through academia for far too bloody long, and had all the classical lessons, and then felt this huge fight, this chasm within myself as a teenager, when I completely disowned it, and my parents were furious, of course, and it was the right thing to do. It was necessary, but then I was very lost at university because I couldn't find someone who was like, but you can't possibly want classical and electronic. You can't have both. And there's me going, but I can because I want to, you know? Yeah, access and of course, being from the northeast of England, where I'm based now, and being from here, we definitely have conversations about class and elitism that are not different to they're different in every part of the country, I think, in every part of the UK. I think it will always be geographically different in different ways. But we have the added ruction of being northern and not southern, where with the greatest love in the world, you know, there is still a divide, which is historical obviously in UK politics and things, and we still feel the repercussions of that very much in the north. Yeah, I think other things that need addressing. I'm intrigued by the experiences that we're sort of sharing here together, and how they may or may not differ, and how it's kind of ironic that the three of us are here together having a conversation about what needs addressing, when actually it isn't us that needs to change things. We already are of this thought that things need to change, and that there should be other people brought into this conversation. I know that I had a second question about how do we change things, but I think I have an extra question as to who should be changing things to. There were people mentioned things about language needs to change, venues, promoters, other artists, and then academia, which I'd like to get onto in a second. I wonder if anyone has any thoughts about who can help fuel a positive change.
I think it's everybody's responsibility, and also that we just get on with what we're doing, and change happens. I mean, what was interesting listening to Knuckle was the thoughts about diversity, that diversity doesn't just relate to cultural diversity. It's I think he's talking about diversity of tactics and different things that need to be addressed. And so what was I trying to say there? I'm, for example, I'm just getting on with making the sounds I want to make for the first time, in having delayed it possibly for 30 years. And I'm just literally walking into places, I'm listening, I'm asking people, how do I get to perform here? What do I need to do? So I haven't entirely got to the point of hearing everybody's or perceiving everybody's reaction to what I do, you know. I did to an extent on the tour with Simon Grab and Yao Bobby, and I had loads of good conversations, and often the conversations were about people either wishing to do workshops or wanting to know what I was doing, how they could go about doing. So there's a variety of methods. You know, you actually go and do it. You engage with people firsthand through conversation or through your actual practice. So that's one way. There might be people in positions of power who observe your activities. They may or then may not choose to employ you in a certain capacity to try to change things. All right. There's definitely issues, I think, in relation to trying to get, for example, funding to do certain projects. All right. You definitely, it's not particularly easy, all right, at all. And I'm sure people who are already engaged in those areas and have a certain level of academic language capabilities, even they will find it difficult. So that hasn't made it at all easy for people who might be interested to then get a leg up or a foothold or a foot in the door, whatever metaphor you want to use, to get into those areas and start creating those kinds of sounds in the first place. All right. I did workshops with a colleague of mine recently in Walthamstow, and it was the first with sixth formers doing media and communication, and my colleague was there he's making a long-term sound and visual installation. And so for the young people, it was the first time for most of them that they saw anything like that happening. And my colleague brought me in to demonstrate the kind of sounds that I was making. And again, it's the first time they are being exposed to those kinds of sounds isolated, you know, like I said, not in the context of where we find experimental sound within daily life. And they were really enjoying, you know, more than I expected, these sounds, and wanted to know how they were being made, what equipment would they use, and just the general processes. And strictly speaking, the first ever music that we engaged in the nurseries, you know, when we were handed all of this percussion and stuff, you could almost argue that's experimental. I mean, we still haven't defined what we mean by experimental, but going back to your nursery days, and we were asked, using this percussion, to express, oh, make a sound that is happy, make a sound that is sad, or today we are going to do the weather, and how do we illustrate the weather using these sounds with these shakers, or, you know, how do we do rain or thunder, you know. And then after that, everything, that's the last time we're ever experimental and encouraged to make sounds and noises and abstract sounds, you know. And I would really like to see that kind of joy and coming back, and people being allowed to make these noises, sounds, whatever, you know. So when sometimes people realize that, yeah, this is something I'm quite into, it's then, well, how do I get access to the places this music is made? How do I get access to certain kinds of educational equipment? And these things aren't necessarily easy, you know. I'm having to troll through things and put keywords into Google to find the actual locations of places, and actually they are dotted all around. Okay, and then I would like to get some funding to be able to afford to have the time to engage in this kind of practice without having to worry about having to earn money for a little while in order to survive. So I can, you know, but I need certain kind of language to be able to fill these forms out, you know. So those are certain things there that could be easier, you know, if the Arts Council really is serious about trying to engage people in musical practice, then some of those things need to seriously change. That process of gaining funding or access needs to be a heck of a lot easier.
It's quite ironic to hear you explain this, because in my experience up here in Newcastle and Gateshead, our conversations with the music organisations here are, well, we have equipment, or we have musicians, we have space, but nobody seems to want to come, nobody seems to want to come in. And it feels, I don't mean to say, I know that sounds like, I don't mean that in a really, I'm sorry, I don't mean, what I'm trying to explain is, I don't know how to even say this. It feels like there's a missing something in the middle. And yeah. It's on one hand, I feel like the problem is partially the access through funding and partially the building, partially off-putting large buildings where people, because of our experiences, our backgrounds, because of how classism works and how it's deep-seated in people and how we are brought up and understand, there are certain buildings that we're conditioned to believe we won't belong in. And I think that is across people of all different nationalities and different experiences. There'll be certain places where people just think, that's not for me. You know, you hear that phrase, like, I'll talk to a taxi driver, they'll go, what do you do? And I'll say, oh, I do this, and they'll go, oh, but that's not for me. Of course it is. It's music. Everything, if you like it, it's for you. That's how it should be. And so it's quite ironic to hear that from you, because it feels like there needs to be a middle person. And then sort of second to that, feedback I've had from funding, from failed applications from Arts Council are to do with not rendering my information enough. So I've been asked, well, if it's to do with your heritage, well, how is it to do with your heritage if you're applying because you are blah, 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 blah. So there seemed to be a stream of thought that was, if you're going to write something because of who you are, and it's to do with so my heritage is Iranian and English, then how are you demonstrating that in your art and your practice? It's not obvious, so therefore you didn't get this funding. And it kind of feels like, well, that, you know, going back to what Nakul was saying, is that diversity doesn't necessarily come across in me sitting playing a Santa and going, I'm an Iranian DJ, wicka, wicka, wicka. But that seems to be the train of thought that I'm told in a conversation. And then also I'm told, oh, but could you take it to the Wild Zwani? Can you go out into the countryside 40 miles away from you, please, and talk to audiences there? And I'm like, well, I don't really know if that's what they want, because I've not actually engaged with that audience. I have an audience somewhere here that's interested in that. And yeah, so it feels like there's some what I hear what you're saying and what you're talking about. And I just have experiences of being on the other side of that also, and still not getting the funding and not getting that space. Is I don't know if it is privilege, because I think we have a right as artists to make a living. So I don't think it is a privilege to be funded. I think it's a fucking disgrace we're not funded every day, to be honest. Other countries do. But yeah, how do we break down those barriers as creatives from different backgrounds and diverse backgrounds? How do we implement diversity in thought, diversity in engagement, and how do we break down the classism and the elitism within that through language? And is it in conjunction with venues? Is it taking it out of venues? Is it with promoters? Is it I don't know, like how how do we start to do this and put it into practice more? What would we tell Arts Council, or what would we tell the Experimental Music Festival to make it actually genuinely experimental and more diverse? What do we mean? There's massive questions I'm just throwing out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Two phrases came to mind. One was by any means necessary, or meaning by all of those methods are valid. But there's another thing that myself and my friend, I'll have to mention his name, is Gary Stewart, who's also a practitioner of sound art with dub morphology, sound and visuals. There's two things that we did. Basically taking matters into your own hands, and we started having performances in his kitchen, you know, where we invited people, and COVID just interrupted that. But we'd done well, we did one there, and he was doing it before. Basically, if you don't get access to venues or spaces, you just have to try and make use of what, and be imaginative and try and make use of what you got. And eventually, either someone is there who's been invited or has come along with somebody else who does have a venue, and then they say, this is really good what's going on here, do you want to bring it out here? And then it grows like that. So that's one method. And then we did the digital equivalent of that, which is what do you call it, doing it by live stream from his attic. You know, we did like 4-hour stream of just non-stop back-to-back sounds, experimental sounds that we happen to be making. And then the idea there is it's exactly the same idea, except it's all in a virtual or a digital domain, and you have access to virtually to people all over the world, and you build it like that. And again, but the thing about both these methods, they're a bit anarchist. They're bypassing the gatekeepers. They're bypassing the people who have got the power to say yes or no to your idea. Okay, and so I'm not going to hang about and wait for someone from the Arts Council to approve what I'm doing. I get on with things anyway, and I'm literally walking around London now looking for places to play and stuff. And so we kind of need to do that as well as directly addressing anybody in positions of relative power. You just have to use every method that is available. And one of your things, what you said about the response of the people owning these buildings or these facilities, that people don't want to come in. Again, that's an area that I really want to deal with, you know, either through workshops, is breaking down the perceptions that people in general have about what is deemed to be experimental. You know, how people perceive it as it's up its own backside, it's elitist, it's not for us, as you said. You know, and I'm just trying to say, no, actually, this is my music. You know, I as an 8-year-old getting my first little transistor radio, I would be tuning in between the stations rather than listening to the stations, because I found that I really loved the sounds, those little noises, and I imagined that I was communicating with aliens, or that maybe that's where I'm from and I'm just rediscovering these sounds. And so here's another discussion, you know, what gives certain people a predisposition to hear what is generally called abstract sound or noises or stuff which is outside the general remit of everyday pop music or classical music. You know, I don't know why I have a predisposition to enjoying those sounds as well as enjoying Diana Ross and the Supremes and punk and dub and Miles Davis. You know, I haven't suddenly stopped loving those because I'm making weird noise and harsh noise, you know. So my personal mission is to try to say to people, there's beauty here in these sounds, and you can use these sounds on their own, or you can add them to the hip hop that you like, or to the punk that you like, or even the classical that you like, or you can juxtapose it with Indian classical music, should you so wish. Or classical dance, etc. There's untold juxtapositions, you know. So that's it really. I just want to convey the joy of these sounds and then see what happens, you know. So it's not just the case that there's not enough Black or Asian people engaged either as musicians, practitioners, or listeners. It's the fact that people in general, or they don't perceive that the experimental sound they do hear on a daily basis, hidden in all these other areas, they don't perceive that as experimental. So it's bridging those and challenging those ideas and perceptions.
Interesting stuff. Nakul, I was thinking about the comment you made earlier when you were talking about the dancer that you'd spoken with and they were uncomfortable performing at an experimental festival, and relating to what Aniruddha's been talking about in terms of access and classism, and how I'm wondering is there a way that your friend could, what would your friend need? What would your friend like? How could your friend work with you in a festival in England or in Scotland, in the UK? What would need to change for them to feel more accepted? I know it kind of sounds daft at the same time. It's like, yeah, but they sound incredible. We want them. And it kind of feels like your friend perhaps felt there was a tokenism behind it. I could be wrong. I got vibes of that. Sorry, if you have anything to say to that.
No, it's interesting. It's an interesting question. But the problem. One of the main reasons why he didn't want to perform is because of the inequalities in India, first and foremost, right? Which obviously we cannot really separate the problems here and the problems back there. But obviously there is something to be done back in India where he gets opportunities to perform his art form the way he wants. And only then will he start thinking about doing something else with it. And for me, what kind of it highlight I don't know how to I don't really know how to understand this, because during that conversation and when I was back in India, experimental music was something that was seen as like you said, a very elite form of music. And this was because I went to I had my first something in classical training for almost like around 12 to 14 years by the time. And then I did my undergrad in Western classical music and in composition. And there I was writing the so-called experimental composition styles, that style of making music, right? And there was this whole elitism associated with it. And it is like, it is better than all other forms of music. You have, Beethoven is amazing, yes, but today we don't write like Beethoven. We don't write film music, we write experimental music. It's because it's nothing else is as there's not a lot of value associated with the rest of it, like pop music, for instance. Like that whole spectrum, experimental music sits on top, and then you have pop music sitting on the other side, right? And then you have a whole separate category which is reserved for the so-called traditional local forms of art. And it doesn't even picture in the spectrum. It kind of falls within a different category. But there was once really interesting thing that one of my friends said when I first moved to Leeds, and this is something that has stuck with me for quite a long time. My friend, I had this flatmate. His name is Tom Knapp, and he introduced me to a lot of amazing things. I owe a lot to him. And one of the things that we did was he showed me how to use quite a few stuff on the computer, and he worked with something, I don't remember the name of the software, and he kind of let it kind of develop over half an hour. He kind of made connections here and there, and finally at the end of it, something really amazing came out of it, right? So half an hour he worked, and he just started. So it was a more of a generative system, and it kind of started making sounds which I really enjoyed. And he said, that is it, that's probably a release. And I said, that what is the point then? Anyone can do this, right? And he said, yeah, that is the point. Anyone can do this. It's not like anyone can do this. It's more like anyone can do this. That's the whole point of this. And that kind of stuck with me, because until then I had been brought up within this Western classical tradition where only after you have worked like 12 years, 15 years on an instrument or learning how to write a score can you become a musician. And suddenly someone is sitting there and using a computer for half an hour without really thinking specifically in the way that we are taught to think, kind of thinking about it. And that really different ways of thinking about music was something that really impacted my music making. It's not that I have totally transferred to the latter, but it's the former. So what I saw here is that why I said the story is that the idea of the so-called experimental music that the artist in India had was very different from the idea of so-called experimental music that my flatmate in Leeds had. It was more of like it sat on the other side of the spectrum, not in terms of its value, but in terms of kind of fighting against these assumptions of the same or similar category of experimental music which taught in academia. So this kind of the tension between these two, I found it really interesting, and I still haven't been able to resolve that question even now. Why is there two different oppositional ways of thinking about it, and how do I locate myself within it, which becomes a third question, because my music lies outside of the spectrum, right? It comes from the so-called traditional that and we are supposed to be like, the folk or the traditional, and we are fetishized for that. So how do I insert myself from there? That's one question. And how do we understand this whole tension in this whole experimental music field, and how do we understand that? And I know this is not an answer to the question that you asked, how can we bring that artist from there? But I think the reason why this artist had this kind of an assumption was that he thought, obviously he doesn't have chances to perform his art. That is a very important and very valid reason. But at the same time, for him, experimental was something that was on the other side of it, right? Other side of performing the traditional art form. So it is sitting on a spectrum which is above, again, like rising above, the same way academia kind of understands experimental music. So it is that hierarchy that it's still the location in the hierarchy that we need to address. I don't know how. Obviously, there are no easy answers here, but only that I guess in a certain way will allow people to engage with it, will make it more open, I would say. And for that, like Aniruddha said, I was really impressed by everything that you said, Aniruddha, because of the very hands-on approach. Like, you are actually going out and doing it, and that's amazing. And I really like how that can contribute to, and what I'm looking forward to is such sort of activism, like, kind of going out in the field and making those changes, how it can bring about a change in this narrative. And in what way can the narrative of the so-called experimental music, I'm very uncomfortable with that term, but unfortunately we don't have an alternative there. So how can it change the narrative of experimental itself and understand it from a totally different perspective, which also includes the whole diversity of tactics. Thank you for that term. That that makes a lot of sense. So how do you kind of understand, reimagine the narrative of experimental music in such a way that all these issues are addressed, and then we can that will, I think, is what's going to allow more participation. And I guess the first step is, as Aniruddha said, go out and do that for people who can do that. And I'm sure, Mariam, you would have a lot to say about, as in there is obviously a lot of other issues that you would face as a woman, maybe going out, and gender obviously plays a big role in the kind of activism.
It does, Michael, but you know, the thing is, I have a twin brother, so I've spent 37 years of my life going about being a woman. So when I talk about things, I'm there as an artist. I'm not there as a female anything. I'm there as an artist, and I'm very clear about that. In fact, I forget sometimes that other people don't, and they are like, "Oh, but you're and I'm like, "No, I'm here." And as you can tell, I'm not quiet, and I'm very involved in a lot of things, and very forthright about that. And I suppose I mentioned a fair bit back about always feeling the fight, and sometimes forgetting that the fight is it's a state of being at times, that we will all feel in our own different way, because it has to be. I think it has to be. I wanted to sort of bring this conversation and turn the direction slightly back in towards academia, because I feel like on one hand, it's part of the problem. It is a problem. It is part of what needs addressing, and it's part of how we can address things. And it's kind of full circle with what Aniruddha is working with now in this project, because actually it is starting to address it, but at the same time, it feels almost primitive because it's so rare to hear that something like this is occurring. And I can't believe that it is that rare. But yeah, here we are in this cycle that we're in right now. And I know Nakul and I have spoken separately about academia and our experiences in academia. I work part-time at Newcastle University. I've been employed by several different institutions previously for my expertise in classical music. Some of them have been conservatoires, others have been universities, some collegiate, some not Russell Group. And yeah, there are definitely very differing attitudes also to how we interpret the word diverse, what we mean by diverse, and then also that conversation about what experimental means. And I suppose that starts to bring back in how we use language, why we're using a certain language, and what we need to do to change that. So it's certainly very refreshing to hear what Aniruddha is going through in this project, and I'm really excited to hear what comes out of it in the end. And obviously, Amit, that you're working with, has done a great deal of work to get to that place. I was also quite saddened to hear that when Aniruddha, you were talking about Arts Council applications, and it felt to me like you felt perhaps that you needed to have a more formal language, or you felt that you were being undermined as perhaps you've been told that you need to formalize something more, where in fact in the past my experience has been you need to stop being so academic about it, when I'm thinking I'm not being academic, I'm just being to the point. So the balance is so off. I think Arts Council's feedback's just shit. And we'll just sit and stare.
Just to clarify.
Yes.
Sorry, just to clarify, I haven't actually made any applications, but I've made attempts to start that process, and kind of each time it's quite daunting, and the feedback I've had from other people who've made both successful and unsuccessful applications, it almost feels like, it's a really heavy filter they're using there just to get very few people successful, and then you're only more likely to be successful if you're already been successful with applications or you've been in the system. And there's something inherently wrong about that to me. Very, you know, it's not very democratic, and it can partly explain why it's part of the reason why there's so few people who are engaged as listeners. I mean, listening is the first port of call. All right, listening is how you experience something, and then perhaps you may wish to partake of that as a practitioner and get yourself educated, or just to start experimenting yourself. So there's that massive gap there, you know. So maybe those issues need to be addressed. You know, why are all of these experimental nights and venues, why are they so hard to find? Is it the case that they don't want many people in there? They don't want certain types of people in there? You know, would that be too threatening? And so these are certain issues that I would like to be dealt with, and then I'm going to directly ask and observe through my own observations. You know, so that's that massive perception of people of what is experimental, and of course, I've constantly sidestepped the issue of what is experimental. What does it actually mean? Maybe it has no definition. Maybe we don't need to find it. You know. And another thing is a lot of our music and our experience in this day and age is framed by capitalism. It's framed by the need to sell things, the need to create a product or a package. And I would say experimental music is just the same. You know, that's an overwhelming framework that we cannot escape from.
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of that, especially about the packaging of experimentalism in a capitalist structure. I think a lot of that is to do with access, and then that access being to get funding, you need to have a product. And I have a product. It can't be the inherent learning. It can't be the process, which is so much more fucking valuable than a CD that would become a coaster very quickly, you know. Or you know, you're going to have a spare 475 in the attic because you're only going to sell 25, and that doesn't mean you're lesser. It's just because you're going to crack on to more things and there's more to do. Yeah, interesting to hear you talk about the venues, experimental festivals and venues, and do they want to see a more diverse audience in? And my experience says yes, they do. I ran a space for several years, absolutely DIY, by the skin of the teeth, self-funded. We were funded once to do a little tour, and we were just constantly up against all these different other projects that were more capitalist driven, and often a lot of feedback would be, but you're not charging enough. No, access means you open the door. Access doesn't mean it's £10. We're in a working class area, and a lot of the people who want to come, some of them have, if they have a job, they have some income. Like that's not what it's about. It's about access and sharing and providing a safe and friendly space to do these things. And that's where I feel true experimentation can occur, from community sharing and learning and yeah, sharing the need for community to gel and bond. It cannot be capitalist. You can't profit from that. Otherwise, as soon as you do, it's not. Yeah. I could go on forever about this. Not cool.
A lot of these issues and a lot of these words haven't been used in the same sentence, and I think that needs to be dealt with. You know, experimental, community, capitalism, they're all connected, they all affect each other, and the discussion hasn't included those concepts, and I think that's part of the problem as well, you know. And so those things do need to be addressed.
Absolutely. Nakul, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I'm not sure. In fact, I agree with you, but yeah, I don't. The thing is that the focus of my struggle has been this question of post-coloniality and decolonizing this music, and I think it is extremely, it's closely tied up with this whole ideology, or like this whole fight against capitalism. But my focus in terms of how I make my music has been to be able to get into the space first, be accepted for who I am. And that is the primary struggle that I'm going through at the moment. And the bigger struggle of this whole commodifying of experimental music probably is a question that I'll deal with once I have a place there. So at some point you have to pick your fights, and I guess capitalism is not my fight at the moment. There is something more basic. There is more that for me personally, this is, I'm talking about my own survival, my own, when you are constantly under the threat of being thrown out of the country, you really don't have time to fight against how the country is, how capitalism works in this country, right? So yeah, as a music, so basically, as the reason why I'm saying is that as a musician who is on a student visa in the UK, I am not allowed to perform for money. So basically, I'm here for 4 years, and I am not allowed to work as an entertainer in the UK, which basically means I just have to not play if I get an opportunity, or if I play, I can't take money, I can't be employed or anything of that sort. So something as basic as your survival, when that is in question, you end up trying to find ways to make money and not worry about whether you're commodifying it or not. That's the second question. That's for people who can afford to do that, for me at least, in this but from the space that I'm speaking right now. So this is a very, very personal opinion. I'm not saying that it is not an important fight. It's just that it's not the fight for me right now. My fight is for survival and acceptance and understanding.
Nakul, that's really hard to hear. I'm sorry you're experiencing that. I didn't realize that was your situation. And it's horrible. And I'm sorry that you have that. And I'm sorry the rules force you into that position, because that is not good enough. That is not good enough. Someone who wants to earn and to be able to have a living, for you should have that right. So I'm sorry that you are experiencing that.
Oh, thank you for saying that. It's thank you. we always find ways to survive, right?
Well, we do, and then that means forcing shit underground and making it illegal. That's what happens. No, but that's what happens. That's what happens. We know this through history. We know that is, and it's certain things that are unnecessary become illegal and become seen as a negative, and that's wrong, especially when it's the right to life and to a safe place to live and to a standard of life. That's wrong, in my opinion.
I totally agree with you. It's just that it has been such a this question. I don't want to derail this whole discussion, but it's just that the way the Home Office functions and the way these rules are framed, and the way the universities respond to it, it is not good enough. It puts people like me in a very difficult place. It's almost as if, and this is not being raised as a very big issue, and that, I guess, in a very interesting way relates back to this question of people of color being in this form of art, right? So as an entertainer, which basically means I am not allowed to perform on stage, which is dance and music and a couple of other things, right? So let's take music as a very important, as one of the most important categories here. Like, it's almost as if people or the universities or anyone here did not even anticipate people of color to come to the UK from abroad on a student visa and be able to get gigs where they can get paid. Because this issue has not been an issue for forever, I guess. And when I raise this issue, the university doesn't have any clue that there is such a problem. No one knows. University of Leeds did not know. University of Edinburgh did not know. And why is that? It's that, and it is funny. My colleague, my classmates, who are doing the same research, or like at the same stage of their research as me, when they are encouraged to go and present their work outside, right? But for me, I am encouraged to present my work outside, but I am not allowed to. So, but no one has thought about it. The university is giving me, saying that, yeah, you can come and do a degree with us. And one of the main aspects of doing a degree with us is that you have to present your research outside. But sorry, you're not allowed to. So how does this work? And this issue, no one has even thought about it. And that is, again, I think in that sense, it links back to this question of people not even thinking about the fact that, or even this basic kind of a courtesy that, okay, maybe people of color who come to the UK from outside of Europe have the potential to make music, and people might be interested in paying them money. And that question has not crossed the minds of the whole university setup. Home office, obviously, it is oppressive. There is no, that's not a question at all. But at least the people who are supposed to, the academia, which is theoretically on the side of the marginalized, kind of is blind and willfully blind, just like the willful mishearing of the music itself. It's like, yeah. So, sorry, I don't know if I derailed the discussion here, but yeah.
I don't think you have. I think you're touching on the most important thing, and that's being human. No, you are, because we're talking about the right to be that, and I wasn't aware of all of that, and I'm just really sorry to hear that, because it's a fucking disgrace. And it's part of what we're talking about, chipping away at. We were just talking about a small segment of it, and you're talking about a different segment, which it's all interrelated. And you have the right to be human and to do things, to be, and you should have that access to education, and it shouldn't be to live in poverty, to have education, to get into a huge amount of debt. That's what it implies for you, and or for somebody, and it shouldn't, and that in itself, and as you're saying, that willfulness to say that you shouldn't do that, you can't do that, you haven't the ability to do that, all of that ignorance is just, it's disgraceful. So I'm agreeing with you. No, it is. I'm just sorry to hear that. I really am. So I think we probably need to wrap this up quite soon, unfortunately, because we've been speaking for quite a while, and I'm wondering if there are any thoughts anyone would like to share before we do wrap things up. No, we have said a lot.
I guess this was really interesting, and I'm really glad the way the conversation developed. And yeah, it was really a very. I learned quite a lot, so that's nice.
I think it's the old cliche. These debates throw up more questions than we had before, but it's kind of true. All of which need to be addressed, and so it's kind of a long haul, really.
Yeah, I wonder if we find an opportunity for the three of us to come back together further down the line and see if there has been any developments, and how things might change and how things go. Aniruddha, I'd really love to hear more about how your project develops. It feels like it's so necessary and so important. It's imperative to how things may possibly change, if there's going to be anything positive in the future. I think especially with cross purposes of academia and artists. So I suppose it kind of feels like this conversation's outlined the necessity of that project occurring. Certainly for me.
Yeah, I totally agree. It is. I think the project is really interesting, and I'm looking forward to reading the outcome of it, and understanding this whole issue a lot better.
Yeah, for me, it coincides with wanting to engage in this kind of practice for literally for decades, but I was busy doing something else. And so I have a feeling that any issues that come up now is what I might have encountered at any point in the last 20 years, should I have attempted to create these kinds of sounds in those kinds of venues or environments. So I'm really interested to see what happens and how things develop, and to see people's reactions to music I'm making and my colleagues as well. Yeah. But for me, as I was kind of implying, it's not just about, it's not only about getting Black and Asian people into this area and then we shut the door behind us. I want to get as many people engaged in these forms of music as practitioners and as listeners, as well as every other music that's out there. It's not an instead of, or this is better than kind of thing. It's just saying, this is great art that's going on here, and I would love you to hear it and partake of it, and incorporate it into whatever you're doing if you possibly can, if your life allows that.
Thank you both, Nakul and Anarudo, for this conversation tonight. It's been a privilege, honestly, to have this, and I look forward to the three of us getting back together and having a chat further down the line. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for inviting me, and I had a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Marwan.
No, it means
Thanks.
so much. I'm just going to press stop the recording.